So tonight, moderating our session, we have William Gunn. He is a New Hampshire psychologist and a volunteer in New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action's Behavioral Health Working Group. And he is going to be introducing our speaker and moderating the Q&A. So Bill, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Emily. This is a real pleasure to introduce Margaret, and so I'm looking forward to her presentation. And let me read the bio that some of you may have seen first, but then add a couple things. Margaret Fletcher was trained and certified through University of Massachusetts Medical Center for Mindfulness to deliver MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and other mindfulness programs. Served as senior teacher and senior teacher trainer at UMass Center for Mindfulness until its closing in 2019. She's a co-founder of East Coast Mindfulness, a fully online program with mindfulness programs and MBSR teacher training. She's an advisor to the Best Family Foundation Eco-Dharma Advisory Board, a group committed to leading efforts at the intersection of mindfulness meditation and the environmental impact of climate change and biodiversity loss. So she's a great sort of bridges those two fields. And I met Margaret before she did any of those things, or most of those things. My first memory of Margaret was coming out of corporate banking and finance. She can elaborate on that if she wants to or not, but it was just impressive to me that somebody felt like, you know, I've been doing this and I've been successful, but there's something missing. And what it is to really center in and be able to deliver programs that are science-based and that are focused and really help folks to appreciate the value that mindfulness is taken. And so we participated together on a group that was formed at Concord Hospital. My previous job was at Concord Hospital as the director of behavioral health at the family medicine residency program there. And we were part of a faculty that developed an anti-cancer lifestyle program. And I talked about change in that programs and the difficulty. And these were for folks at our cancer center there who had breast or other kinds of cancer and who wanted to do everything they could to keep it from recurring. So they wanted skills and the ability to do what they could, knowing that, you know, you can only do so much, but what's the evidence that says we can do this? And Margaret taught the part around mindfulness, and it was for people who came in who had no knowledge of it. I was totally impressed by their interest and ability for her to connect to them and for them to get whatever they could out of it to encourage their program. And then personally, I took an MBSR program myself during particularly a period of challenging time in my life. And again, was totally impressed by Margaret's ability to connect with us and sort of the things that came out of that. I wish I could say from there, I have this mindfulness practice that's been there ever since, but that would not be completely truthful, but it has really helped my sort of attitude in those situations where it's easy to kind of stress out to go, no, I'm getting an A+ in the way I'm handling this situation. That was between us. So I really am looking forward to a conversation and some information that she's going to present and the conversation with us, particularly as it relates to climate control. So thank you, Margaret, for coming, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Emily and Bill. Such a sweet time to see you again and to work together with you, as you mentioned that we have in the past. Thank you all so much for your interest in coming tonight. And I think I'll just dive right in with what we're here for. So I've got a very small number of slides. We're not going to hang out a long time staring at slides together, but there'll be a little bit because I've promised you in this time together that there'll be some information, some evidence, some theory around mindfulness. But I'd also love for this to be as interactive as possible. So there's going to be some practice and a couple of chances for dialogue and questions and answers. So let's just see what I have on this slideshow that I've prepared. And gosh, let me just make sure that I've got it teed up to the place that I want it to start from before I share it. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
And please feel free for folks to add to the chat. If something comes to you while she's talking, I'll try to monitor that, or Emily, that would be helpful to sort of look at that. So feel free to do that.
Wonderful. Good idea, Bill. Thank you so much. Okay, so can everyone see this lovely green view? Yeah, it's wonderful. Thanks for the thumbs up on that. So we're here tonight for a little introduction and exploration around the practice of mindfulness. And for us, I include myself in that cohort, we who are distracted and deserving in this world, and particularly as it relates to not only distracted and deserving, but I should have added distressed around the climate emergency. So the basic outline for the next 55 minutes or so is we're going to look at a definition of mindfulness. And I'll speak a little bit about some basic theory and offer the evidence basis for mindfulness practice in general, and then a little bit around climate action. We will practice together at least 2 different ways, maybe 3. We'll see how much time we have. And I hope that you'll have a chance to identify for yourself ways that this approach, this possibility we call mindfulness as practice, you might apply not only in your daily life, but also in the face of the climate emergency, and possibly to be able to extend these ideas to clients and patients if you are in practice that way. And at the end, I'll give you a little bit around practice resources. That will include making the slideshow available. There are going to be some research links throughout, and I want to make sure that you have those. So I'll provide a PDF to anybody who'd like me to provide that to them. You can email me, and you'll see my email address at the end, or I can send it along to Emily, and she can forward it along to anyone who's asked for it. So let's just begin with a definition of mindfulness. It's a word that kicks around a lot these days. You've probably seen it on the front of a publication in CVS, where I've seen it, or in a newsstand. You've seen it in headlines on news feeds. It's there's a lot of talk about it, but what is it actually? So what I'd like to give you is a working definition that was created by one of my teachers, John Kabat-Zinn. He's the founder of the University of Massachusetts Center for Mindfulness, and the inventor of the very well-known 8-week course Bill mentioned, mindfulness-based stress reduction. This is a definition that shows up a lot in the research, so let's take a look at it. First of all, we see this word awareness. Okay, nothing mysterious about that. We all have awareness. So for instance, if you're looking at your screen right now, you have some visual awareness going on. You know that you're seeing something. So this is just a practical word. Sometimes people get caught up with it though. What is awareness? It's the kind of awareness, as we practice mindfulness, what we can find out is it's the form of awareness that can arise and be cultivated and developed by paying attention in a particular way. So we've got a what, awareness, and now we're going to look at the how, by paying attention in a particular way. And we'll practice this in just a bit. By paying attention on purpose. This one's a big piece, because much of the time our attention is really not so intentional or purposeful. It's kind of following the trail of its nose, or what happens to be arising in your mind spontaneously. So to be able to purposefully place your attention, that's a big thing. To pay attention in the present moment. So I bet you're familiar with the gosh, I was just lost in a memory of something that happened before, or I'm starting to get worked up about how something might go later today, and I'm playing out 5 different scenarios, probably none of which will happen. In other words, we sort of mentally travel away from the here and the now. So to be able to come back to the here and the now, the present moment, it's powerful. And then to do so without beating ourselves up. I'll just put it that way. Of course, we still exercise judgment, but most of the time, without even realizing it, many of us have a kind of loop or automatic thought pattern that comes in, and it's quite critical, and especially of ourselves. So to be able to watch ourselves do this and, kind of be a good-hearted coach to ourselves rather than a rotten voiced coach to ourselves, that takes some training for many of us. So we pay attention in this way, and we do so in the service of self-understanding and wisdom. So here's the why of mindfulness. And let's just pause for a moment and look at this definition and consider for ourselves. This definition, by the way, has been around for 40 years. I think well before anyone was talking about climate depression, climate anxiety, climate emergency. But it has been around for 40 years, and really the idea of it has been around for millennia as a means for helping us understand ourselves, see where distress is running us, and find ways to serve our own self-understanding and wisdom, and drop the habits of distress and recrimination. So consider for yourself for a moment how that might be valuable in the face of what we're all encountering now, climate emergency, where there is a lot of anxiety and distress, and what do we do with it? And how can we be effective in the face of these kinds of strong feelings and difficulties? So the age-old contemplative practices have a lot to say about what to do in those kinds of situations. And really, personally, I can't think of a more important time for us to be bringing in self-understanding and wisdom in order for us to be able to act as skillfully and effectively as we can. So that's John's definition. Now I want to speak just a little bit about the evidence basis, and then we'll move along to practice. So I'll quote just a few studies. There are many, many studies, but maybe some that can help us understand a little bit better how mindfulness might have a role to play in helping us to deal with the climate emergency. So here's a study from the journal Neuroimage, and this was done by a researcher named Dahl in Germany at the Department of Neuroradiology at the Munich Technical University. And what they saw was that cultivating mindful attention to breath helped to regulate emotions. And it came along with an increased imagery that showed an increased connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex in the brain. The amygdala being that important area of the brain that's central to the nervous system and processing emotional stimuli, and its connection to the prefrontal cortex so that we actually have a way to choose and navigate what we do about that. So another, I'm sorry, let me just go back. I clicked a little too fast. Another research study that I want to mention, it comes from the Journal of Brain Imaging and Behavior. And this showed that through mindfulness practice, folks could demonstrate a reduced interference in their working memory. This is an aspect of our cognitive self that we need to be able to access to be effective. And that not only that, but it was associated with an increase in a hippocampus in the brain, an area of the brain that is used for, plays a major role in learning and in memory. So to be able to take out that kind of interference that comes in and mind wandering and judgmental thought processing and getting caught up in ourselves, so that we can actually remember what we're about and be able to act on that. Well, to me, that sounds like it would be useful in life anyway, but particularly around this theme, climate emergency. Let's talk about psychology for a minute. There are lots of studies that talk about reduction in perceived stress and reduction in anxiety, reduction in depression. And this is one that I like to mention because, as you heard, I'm also active in mindfulness for anti-cancer lifestyle promotion. So this was done by the Department of Psychology at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And it's interesting to note that in the UK, because there's been such a kind of move to include mindfulness as an actual medical intervention, there are studies that have been published that show mindfulness as a first-line intervention for treatment of major depression. In other words, folks who aren't interested in taking medication show the same efficacy as medication when they undertake an 8-week mindfulness for depression amelioration training. So to be able to use mindfulness to help us understand and relate with our stress so that we reduce, we're reducing our perception of it, that sure sounds like something that could help out around climate. And then here's this from the Clinical Psychology Review, a meta-study, actually both of these were meta-studies, showing that mindfulness-based therapies are especially effective in treating depression, anxiety, psychological distress. And that meta-study was completed by Corral and a team at the University of Montreal in Canada. But what about the climate emergency? So I've got a couple of things I can offer to you here. In the Journal of Sustainability, there was a group from the University of Wisconsin that has a very well-regarded mindfulness training center. They developed an 8-week mindfulness for climate action pilot based on the 8-week MBSR course. And this pilot demonstrated high adherence, participant satisfaction, and their ability to make personal changes to their own carbon footprint. So using this to help people wake up to and take action in their own lives, what they can personally do, this turned out to be possible, shown as possible, and and having promise in this particular study. One other journal, the Sustainability Science Journal, has published something a little bit more recently, and it talked about mindfulness and adaptation around climate change. And here's what they had to say. The practices are prevalent. They're being used widely in many institutions that are looking at how can we support human beings in this time of emergency and crisis. And what they found was that many institutions are using it. People anecdotally are reporting benefit by it, but that the research is in a very early state. So there are a lot of calls for research from many institutions, foundations, even governments. The UK and the EU have commented on this, and the research is in a very early state. So I've talked a lot and I need to take a breath. And here's a little image to help me do that, maybe to help you pause and receive some of that I just spoke. I want to stop sharing my screen now and come back to you all. So what do we make of all of this? It's interesting to hear the evidence, to consider how this might work. let's do some practice together. And what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to have some dialogue and just start to touch some of the ways that you all might see that this could be applied, either, just for your own life, and then in terms of what you might be experiencing around the climate and our climate emergency. So what I'd like to offer is a guided practice, and there'll be a couple actually. The first one is called the 4-center practice. And then we'll finish up with a little bit of what you heard about just a little bit earlier, awareness of breathing, attending specifically to the breath and what might occur if you try that on for yourself. And afterwards, I'll ask for some comments. What did you notice? So you'll be paying attention, and hopefully you'll be able to report in a little bit on what did you notice. So encourage you each now to wiggle around a little bit, maybe have a stretch, and use this opportunity to rearrange yourself so that you feel comfortable in your body, but also awake and alert in your attending. So it might mean just sitting up a little bit forward from the back of your chair, and you're welcome to put a little blanket or pillow behind you, but something so that you feel that sense in your own body of awakeness, alertness. You're welcome to close your eyes. You can also practice with your eyes open. And you can let your hands just settle someplace that feels comfortable. And just check in for a moment on your breath and noticing if your breath can move freely in your torso. And if you're positioned upright and easeful, you might be able to take just a slightly deeper breath here. And then let your own body settle into this position that you've arranged for yourself. So I've just suggested paying attention to your body, and this is the first center, body. And your awareness is right here. You know how to do this. You've been to the doctors where a practitioner has said, what are you experiencing in your back? If you mentioned that you were having a hard time with your back, you know how to zoom your attention right into your back. This is attending to sensations right now in your whole body, and you might just take a moment to check in to your feet and legs and just notice what's here. Sensations in your torso and bottom, back, and your front. The breath, digestion. Not trying to make anything happen, but simply noticing sensations of the body, breathing, whatever it is you find. Now, as you scan your body this way, you might find places that are uncomfortable. And you might actually notice then that habit of the mind to complain or judge or scold you. And this is noticing. So as best you can to simply recognize, oh, there's thinking that's happening. And if you can just set that aside and return to the direct sensations of your body. Nothing going wrong. Simply what is here now. Checking in with hands, arms, shoulders. As you review your body, you may find, as you're sitting in stillness, Oh, you find something here and it doesn't feel so comfortable. And you're acknowledging this without judgment. You might even find something you could do for yourself, a little something. It might be rolling the shoulders or pointing and flexing the ankles or just wiggling a little more comfortably in the chair. Please allow yourself to do what feels best for you. And here in the neck and the head, balanced atop the body. Sensations of the hair tickling your neck or the temperature of the air on your cheeks. Mouth a little dry or a little moist, just how it is for you right now. This is the first center, the body center. Paying attention on purpose to this present moment body. And there's nothing here to be in judgment about. It's simply, this is your alive body, breath by breath. Now let's move to the second center. We'll call this the mind center. What's playing out in your mind right now? And to be kindly about this with yourself. Maybe it's quiet right now in the domain of thinking. Or you might notice revisiting that conversation that happened earlier, or toying with the project that you've got to work on some more tomorrow. And this is just evidence that your good mind is functioning. And you can make a choice in this moment not to, get involved or caught up, if that's possible. Sometimes it's not. But if you notice yourself getting caught up and starting to sort of wander into the territory of this thought pattern, maybe you could come back to one breath. Sensations of one inhale and one exhale. And then once again, just touching into what's here in the mind. And to receive what's arising for you as just, this is what's here right now. And again, if there's something that needs caretaking, you have that agency to do so. Sometimes people ask me, is it okay if I jot a note down while I'm meditating? I'm like, well, no, don't go into full-on journaling mode, but if there's something really strong that comes to you, pick up a pen, write it down, and then set it aside. It's fine. This is you caretaking your own good mind. Awareness of thinking. Just simple awareness. No need to get involved just now. Let's move to the third center now, the heart center. It's a part of us we are not often encouraged to visit. The domain of emotions. So again, receiving what is here, acknowledging. And if there's some gesture of caretaking for you, you're welcome to do so. Just seeing, oh yes, I am worried about that person. Yes. Or there's some residual joy or anger from something earlier today. Yes, that's part of my emotional life. It's happening. Yes. Now we'll move to the fourth center, and that is the bigger picture. The bigger picture. We can widen our ears, open eyes if they've been closed. We don't need to lose track of the sensations of breath and aliveness in the body, but to be here in the present moment, alive and aware. And that includes that we're here in a world. I'm starting to look around myself. I'm here with you all, and I see you all. And some of you I can see attending, and we're connecting. And this is a domain of awareness too. It's kind of like all of it all at once. And we know how to do this. We can navigate a grocery store and what have you. But to do it purposefully and to see what it's like to do so, to actually take in the experience of it, that's something. So this is the 4 centers practice. And I've got a slide for you later. You can see the outline of it. So if you decide you'd like to try it again, you can ask for the slides and see the outline. So Bill, you and I are here together, and we have a little bit of time here where it would be so useful to hear from some folks very briefly. What did you notice in this last 10-minute practice? So you might raise a human hand and Bill could see it, or you could use that raise hand function in Zoom and somehow we can bring you in. What did you notice?
Get it? Okay. Paul.
I noticed peacefulness.
Okay. And was that, Paul, was that in contrast to something else a little bit earlier?
Well, it's sort of the end of a day of doing more things, and that was probably part of it. But yeah, it just sort of the focusing in on the present brought a sort of peacefulness with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I know what you're talking about, the sort of momentum of the day. And we ride on that and to good use, to good purpose. But then do I notice that it just keeps going? Is there some way that I could actually down-regulate that momentum? And so you felt some calm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Who else, Bill?
Wes. And then Jennifer. Well, you're on mute, Wes.
Yes, unmute myself, get my hand lowered, get present. So by way of starting, I actually found John Kabat-Zinn almost 10 years ago, and then let go of him because it was too much work. And about 8 years ago, found the app Calm. And so I've been practicing mindfulness in my own particular form, using that as the foundation for it for 8 years now.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
I started the process as a vehicle for recovery from bipolar.
Sure.
And in the process is in a lot of therapeutic processes. It's led me to a presence in the world that I wouldn't be without it, no matter how enlightened I become.
Well, thank you, Wes. Is there something you want to say about what happened to you? Just now.
The exercise just now. I was struck by, before the exercise, up until the exercise, I was struck by the absence of heart in my consciousness. Mind and body, and the chatter of the mind that is incessant.
Mhm.
And I made great stride, made some made some progress in being with that. But the heart dimension was very powerful, as was the last dimension, the name of which,
The all of it, the bigger picture. I think is,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
It's not that I'm not familiar with that perspective. It's more that I hadn't pulled it together with mind, body, heart. And I'm still dwelling in what is this picture that I've been exposed to.
Yeah, yeah, that was similar for me of going, because the heady academic studies sort of sucked into sort of thinking about that. And then the abrupt switch to sort of complete the picture with the heart was true for me. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wes.
And thank you for being here, Margaret.
Yes.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And if anybody wants to, we won't have time to get reactions from everybody, but just put some things in the chat if you feel like that's something that's easier for you, or just to sort of capture other experiences.
Yeah, we've got time for a couple more, I think. And I think I saw, can people just put their, yeah, I see Jennifer. Was there someone else who had a physical hand up? Stephen and Ruth. Okay, so how about those three, and then we'll move along. And brief if you can keep it that way.
Thanks, Margaret. That was a great exercise. And what I got out of it tonight was I came home and was kind of ruminating on the workday, and already making plans for tomorrow, and maybe some notes that I'll take a little bit later on. And then quickly within your mindfulness exercise, I was able to completely be in the moment, forget about what happened today, forget about what my plans are for tomorrow. So it was really, really a nice exercise in just being in the moment.
Wonderful.
Thank you for that.
And I'm sure those will come back to you when you need them, but to be able to set aside. Yes. Yes.
And Steve, great to see you again.
Yeah, first of all, it was nice to see some people I recognize here. I'm going to feel, I'm not supposed to be judgmental, but I'm retired and I felt a little bit of boredom. And that sounds very negative. So and I also, as a practicing psychiatrist, found it outrageous that you can achieve a major depression by just mindfulness. But those are my thoughts or reactions.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And especially thank you for mentioning boredom, because that's a human experience. And we're not trying to make something special happen here. We're trying to catch on to ourselves. And I know for myself, if I'm bored and I'm not really tuned into myself, I can do some, sort of not so healthy things. Distraction, going into entertainment, that sort of thing. But when I catch on to myself and I know myself to be bored, I can find a way to relate to it that just feels more healthy than otherwise when I'm going to say functioning on autopilot. So good for you for naming boredom. It's great. And I hope you grab a copy of the slide set, and you can click on the links and go read the research around these results that have been found, particularly in the UK around depression.
And
Thanks so much, Stephen.
Thank you for your insights about boredom.
Yeah.
And one more, I can't remember.
Ruth.
I just wanted to say that after a somewhat frustrating day, sitting down and going into that, I immediately found it very calming and very centering, and just let everything go without any thought about it at all. It was quite nice. Thank you very much. It was just what I needed.
Oh, I'm glad.
Great. And in the post, in the chat, the calmness and stillness, very nice to do something for me. This time of day particularly, I find there's a lot, and to take the time to do that. Disconnectedness between my mind and body. My body felt exhausted with some aches, but my brain just kept on going. What's the next thing? Not sure I reached the in the moment, but I still have hope and keep trying.
Yeah.
Great
Well,
comment.
as you saw from the definition, it's a possibility, an awareness that arises. And yeah, somebody said it takes a lot of work. Indeed. I don't know about a lot of work, but it takes some consistent application. So I'm going to tell you a little bit later about some ways that you could do that for yourself. But how about we, just before I go back to the slides, I love some of the examples that I've heard. And what we're talking about is it's like an introductory practice. It's a beginning. And already to imagine, like we can practice this and find out what it takes to touch into our own calm. So if we're getting overtaken by anxiety, we're not going to be effective. We're not going to be our best selves. And if we have that capacity to source out of our own being, which is what you did with a little bit of guidance from me, how to touch into calm, that can start to downregulate a system of anxiety and give us more access to this prefrontal cortex. Imagine what it would be like if more of us were applying ourselves in that way towards our own effectiveness around life, climate emergency, voicing what is needed. So there's a lot that people discover, a capacity to be able to access and express through mindfulness practice that you all are already pointing to. And that's impressive to me. So let's look a little bit at something I'm calling the mechanisms of mindfulness. So here we go. We'll go back to the slides. And so here's just a little summary of what we did, this practice, the 4 centers. Tune into what's here. Acknowledge this is what's happening. Boredom, calm, etc. And then when needed, take care of, care for. So those are the instructions. And then here are the 4 centers: body, mind, heart, and the bigger picture. And our ability to touch into these and notice the connections, body and mind. They're really not separate, but we know how to sort of consider them and reflect on them in a way that shows us, oh, body and mind they're not separate, they're connected. Heart, heart and mind, heart and body, these exist in the same place. And that all of this is taking place in the context of a larger world. And we can be aware of all of this dynamically and inclusively. So a couple of mechanisms, and I could hear you, some of you speaking about this already. So first one, mindfulness giving us the ability to interrupt autopilot. So I want to give you a little image here. Think about, and I think you're all old enough so that this image is going to work. Do you know that idea of a broken record and how there's a groove and the record just keeps sort of repeating the groove? I think it was Ruth, you talked about ruminating, and this is what we're talking about, ruminating, rumen. The root of that word, rumen, is the same that we use for cows that just keep chewing and chewing on the same meal. And that's what's happening for many of us during core parts of the day. The neuroscientists have given this a name, the default mode network, meaning we're all so mind-oriented that we forget we have a body, for example, and we get just stuck in thinking, planning, considering. And I generated some of that, didn't I, Bill? You said I was hearing all that science and I was just getting really, wound up in all of the ideas and the thoughts around that. So you might feel like that idea is familiar. What happens if we're able to lift the needle? And so some of you described that. I was able to, I heard you talk about, I could forget about what had been really sort of taking over my brain from this day. I could forget about it and feel that my body was here, my breath is here. And so what happens when you do that is you lift the needle from that repeating thought pattern. And when you do that, it results in what I'm calling a network switch to something called the perceptual sensory network. Sensory meaning breath, the touch of your hands, the feeling of your back against the chair. That's sensory. And that you're able to perceive smells, sights, touch, sound directly. A big shift happens in your brain. You move away from that, sort of nonstop narrative, and you come into the present moment. And the interruption of that provides a couple of really important possibilities. First of all, there's a release that happens. And so you mentioned that. We heard about that. It might be physical, it might be mental, it might be psychological. Could be more than one of those. And with that release comes in some space for what's unseen, what's preferred, or what's being avoided. Like I was saying, and you mentioned, Stephen, it's like when I'm not aware that I'm bored, I'm fidgeting, I'm distracting myself, I'm wasting time, which, okay, that's all right. But when I can really touch into my boredom, I notice I was avoiding it. And now I can know it. And because I can know it, I can take care of myself better. So that's a mechanism, is interrupting the autopilot. There's another mechanism that's related, and I'm calling it the power of the pause. So in our lives, there's just event after event, and we're dealing with it. And that's fine. We're dealing with them as they come. But when things are stressful, we seem to have this autopilot way of just moving right into how I usually deal with that. This guy's on my tail in traffic, and I can feel my blood start to boil. And suddenly the words are coming out of my mouth, and I'm not driving so safely. And that's the reaction. In the practice of mindfulness, something else becomes possible. In other words, there's a new pathway when we have that interrupt and the awareness opens up. It means that we have ourselves back in that moment and a range of choices that we have always had, but because of behavioral conditioning, we've sort of forgotten because we're just stuck in that kind of autopilot. This is how I deal with this. So we take a pause, feel a breath, notice what's happening around us, recognize these are the kinds of thoughts that are playing out, anger thoughts, here are the emotions. We get to know ourselves in that non-judgmental awareness way. And because we are able to do that, we can choose something different. And I'm calling that the response. So the possibilities here are response being maybe a new perspective. It might be, I'm on to myself, which I wasn't a few breaths ago. Connection with my own body and with my own emotions, with the thoughts that are happening. And most importantly, with all of that comes choice. Choice, meaning, wow, I usually do it this way, and that hasn't gotten me, that hasn't brought me into such great places. How about if I breathe for a couple more seconds and consider, what else could I do here? Agency, choice, it's power. So that's quite amazing. So let me stop sharing my screen. Go back to you all.
Margaret, there was one comment in the chat that
Yeah.
I think is a good one, that we have about 10 minutes left here. And at some point, it would be great to hear sort of your thoughts and others' thoughts about the application to climate emergency.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do everything in an hour, but I think to end it with how would this apply would be great.
That's right where we are. That is right
Okay.
where we are in the outline here. Well, so you just saw some mechanisms, and I imagine that there are a number of you here who are working with patients, with clients. You yourself also have climate anxiety, climate distress. So I want to read to you something that that comes from the Mindfulness Initiative in the UK. It's a Parliament-endorsed report. And this comes from a part written by Laureline Simon, who was a former United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change officer. And she's also the founder of something called One Resilient Earth. She says, the first ability that we should cultivate to support climate action is the ability to connect. And we've heard this from other presenters in this series, particularly around connecting with nature. So she goes on to say, connect to our own bodies, to others, to the nature around us. But what emotions then come can be unpredictable. So the second ability would be to feel them without shutting down or recreating the distance. And as you've heard from me, many institutions are applying these practices and techniques to give people tools and capability to not hide from their climate anxiety or distress, not ignore it, but to actually start to, we say in the mindfulness field, befriend those more difficult emotions and consider in this position of interrupting what helps us to hide and bringing forward the pause that gives us the opportunity to act with more self-understanding and wisdom, as John Kabat-Zinn talked about. To do so for ourselves and to be able to then recognize that it makes us more effective in our lives and in our work around climate anxiety, because nothing's going to help anyone if people are acting out of overwhelm, uncontrolled anger. And there's appropriate anger, of course, around climate and diversity loss. But we've got to bring our best selves to bear. I can't think of a time that I've been alive where that was not more important than this. So to me, that's the basic underlying power of mindfulness around climate anxiety and climate change. But it's still, as I mentioned, it's still early in the research. So I don't want to get too worked up about this. I'm really interested in hearing from you all. Does that make sense? Can you make the connection from what you experienced to how that might help you or your clients? So let's just have some more hands again, or, send a chat. Susan.
I was the one who brought up that question. I have studied meditation for 40 years, and this is all very well established, what you're talking about. But in Keene, we're having a series of climate cafes, and the whole concept is that these people who are coming to the cafe are going to be open to their emotions when it comes to the climate. And I didn't see anything that I could use to put a face on our emotions any better than I did, yesterday.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Susan. Sounds like you've had some good experience with this, so it may be that it's already in your lexicon. I'm seeing James, your hand up.
Hi. Well, first of all, I really enjoyed exercise. So thank you for that. And what I think felt most strongly was relief. And I realized that's because every time I hear about the climate crisis or I talk about the climate crisis, I'm then asked to do something. And then often I know that that thing isn't going to work, or it's just going to stress me out again. And so it was sort of a little revelation to then be asked to do nothing, or there was no further demand. I found that very liberating, and that could be hard to apply to climate action, but it's certainly very interesting feeling.
Yeah, James, we're talking about some early, sort of self-oriented regulation that we're practicing here. So one of the things I'm in the process of doing is taking the 8-week MBSR course, which really goes into much more depth around the range, the menu of practices and how they apply in different ways to your life. So I'm taking that 8-week course and adapting it for those who are climate concerned and climate active. And again, like you were also mentioning, Susan, this is a bigger topic. It certainly warrants a much richer review, and I'm in the process of that. So any of you who'd like to stay in touch about that and maybe be in my pilot group of that, I would so urge you to be in touch with me by email, and I can let you know when that course is going to happen. So I see that we're getting so close to time, and I do want to share my contact information with you. So I'm going to type my email address in right now.
I have also just added the continuing education link to the chat, so everyone can access that there.
Yeah, wonderful. So I'm at margaretwpfletcher.com, and I also want to share my screen one more time and share a couple of other things with you. So let's take a look at just some opportunities for future development around your practice. First of all, again, here's my contact information. And if there's more that you wanted to share or ask about, please be in touch. I'd be happy to hear from you. My main teaching is through East Coast Mindfulness, and we have a free weekly 30-minute worldwide online sit. Happens on Thursdays, 12:15 to 12:45. And here's a link for that. And again, as I mentioned, if you just want to email me, I'll send you the slideshow, and then you can have this link. And then the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course, you've heard it mentioned. I have a course coming up in the spring. That's the classical 8-week intensive training in mindfulness. And then in the fall, I'll be offering the adapted 8-week course for mindfulness for climate concerned and climate active. So I'd love to have any and all of you present for that. The last thing I want to do is to thank, first of all, Bob Friedlander for introducing me to the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, to Bob Fader and Emily Thompson for inviting me to offer this presentation to you tonight, and to my colleague, Bill Gunn, for your delightful help. So let me stop sharing my screen and come back. And there it is, 7 o'clock. Thank you all so much for your participation, and
Thank you.
keep practicing, do a little bit more and a little bit more, and it really does help.
Thank you, Margaret, very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Margaret.
Very welcome. Good to be with
Have a
you
good
all.
evening,
Bye-bye.
all.